Hello, my name is Mark Kushner, and I am an Associate Professor of Hospitality Management at Community College of Philadelphia in the Culinary Arts and Hospitality Management programs. Today we'll be discussing Etiquette 101. I know you're thinking all kinds of rules, all types of regulations, but that's really not the case. The whole idea is to make you feel more comfortable with the dining experience. And we are talking dining, not eating. Eating is sustenance. Eating is driving by a fast food restaurant, stopping at the window and having food thrown at you in a styrofoam box. In dining, we're looking for something more social, a special occasion, a first date, a business meeting. And as we discuss dining and as we discuss etiquette, we are going to be in two different worlds. We're going to be in the traditional world and we're going to be in the modern world. And in the modern world, we're going to be exercising certain nuances as we go through the seminar. But most importantly, we want you to understand that some of these rules are traditional and they're based on chivalry, not chauvinism. What lady doesn't like a door held open for them, a chair pulled out for them? What gentleman doesn't like being the host and being in control, if only for a short period of time? So as we're talking about dining etiquette, it actually begins with the invitation. You've received an invitation to join another party for dining. And as you look at that invitation, the first thing you're going to see, of course, is the attire. If it's black tie, that's obvious. If it's business attire, that's another. And of course, if it's cash. But usually both the attire and timing would be apparent on the invitation. When you receive that invitation, make sure that you understand the timing is essential. There is no such thing as being sociably late. Now, it's very important to understand that in a restaurant environment, and you have a party of 6 or more, we're not going to be seating you till the entire party arrives. Many people believe that's because the restaurant doesn't want to take a chance that might turn into a party of 4 versus a party of 6, and they want to save the dining. That's not the case at all. The real reason behind that is we don't want to have 4 people seated, 2 people arriving, should we eat, should we not eat, and that would become a whole different set of rules and etiquette. So that can be avoided completely by having everybody arrive on time. Remember, not arriving on time calls undue attention to yourself. And what it really does is it says that you are more important than the rest of the dining experience. And we don't want that to occur. Should you be dining at someone's home instead of a restaurant, feel free to bring something with you, a bottle of wine, a fresh baked baguette, an Entenmann's, and try to bring something so that you show the host that you thought of what a special occasion it was. We're going to be talking today primarily about in a restaurant environment, though the dining experience at the table side is really no different, whether in the home or in a restaurant. But there are some other mores that we do want to talk about here. The first thing will be actually the seating. Typically in a seating environment, and let's just think of this as 2 couples. It would be the male here and his significant female other to his right. Across from him would be the other male and his significant other to his right. So we've basically got this boy-girl situation. If the 2 gentlemen were sitting next to each other, obviously they'd be talking about business or sports. If the 2 ladies were sitting next to each other, they'd either be talking about the gentleman or somebody else walking in the room saying, oh, I can't believe she's really wearing that. So as you can see, the boy-girl seating is very easy to remember because your significant other is to your right, and absolutely, she always is. The next part, as we look at the dining experience, is the napkin itself. When you see the napkin on the table, remember the napkin should be picked up and folded and placed over one's lap, not tucked in like a bib. If you wanted a bib, you should have ordered the lobster. So in this dining environment and in the rules of etiquette, not only is it the invitation, not only is it your arrival time and your attire, it begins the moment seating takes place. Somewhere along the line, someone will be designated as the host, and this is important as we go through the seminar. The first thing you're going to encounter is the table setting itself. As you look at the table setting, you're going to see that the flatware is rather overwhelming. And we will be talking about more than one type of setting. But before we get on to the flatware, let's start with the plates. The plates are very easy to discern because the plate in front of you is what's known as a service plate. It's also known as a lay plate. Food is not actually consumed on this plate. This is actually there to hold another plate. These are easy to tell because there's only one per person. It's when we get to the bread and butter plate, it becomes a little bit more complex. Because there are 4 B&B plates on the table, and that is the terminology, bread and butter plate, you actually have one to your left and one to your right. and hence the confusion because you're not really sure which one is yours. There's a very simple mnemonic device for remembering which is your bread and butter plate. Simply take your palms and face them both facing each other. I'm waiting. Okay, very good. Now make the OK sign with both hands. Slightly tip them towards you. Do not go like this. This will make you look like Batman or Catwoman, as the case may be. By looking at these two, you will notice the one to your left resembles the letter B, and that stands for bread. The other one resembles the letter D, which may in fact be your grade on this seminar when we finish, but it really stands for the word drink. So as you place your hands like this, B is for bread, your bread plate is to your left. D is for your drink, and your drink is to your right. So it's very simple to remember that. A couple other rules to remember about dining is that the rules of dining etiquette were not only chivalrous by nature, but were also based on the fact that the majority of us are right-handed. And because we are right-handed, the placement of the flatware and the movement of food and the way it's passed is almost always to the right. Your right hand is your hand of skill, and your left hand is your hand of strength. This is your dexterity, where you're more cautious because you have more skill, and this hand is your hand of strength. Therefore, we can be doing something with our right hand and checking our watch and multitasking simultaneously. This is important to remember because as we're placing the flatware on the table for the first time and setting the table, or consuming as a diner, to remember the most important item, which is the knife. Now, if you look at the history of flatware, knives are the first dining implement. Men hunted with the knife, men killed with the knife, men prepared the food with the knife and actually consumed the food with the knife. That knife, in fact, may have resembled something more of this nature. Now, obviously, this is a much larger knife than we would encounter today, but its sharpness is such that we would place the knife on the table with the blade in. By placing it with the blade in, we will avoid harming ourselves as we dine. This creates another rule of service, as after the table is set, everything moves from the outside in. But our right hand is our hand of dexterity. So the knife would be to the right with the blade facing it. If you check, and if you go on Google, you'll find that the next implement which really comes into play is that of the spoon. And while it was more gourd-like than anything to catch the gravies and sauces, it was obvious that the knife and spoon almost encounter each other simultaneously. Go on Google and check out forks. You'll find out it doesn't really happen for another few centuries later on. As we're looking at the knives and we're looking at the tables, another historical nuance to remember is that in all cases, the men carried these knives on them. And they were rather large by size. They were actually short swords. Did you know that because of that, men's clothing buttons differently than ladies' clothing? Men's clothing is buttoned with the buttons on the right. The ladies' clothing, the buttons are on the left. And the rationale behind that is, historically, is that the male could unbutton his waistcoat and draw his weapon simultaneously. Okay? And that is why our buttons are still in that fashion. Since we are right-handed, it only makes sense that the next implement be to your left. And that left-handed implement is obviously the fork. And the fork almost always is opposite of the knife on the left-hand side. Now, as you're looking down at the table and you look at the various settings, and we will be discussing different settings, you're looking at a number of different pieces of flatware. You already know the knife is to your right. You know the fork is to your left. You know your drink is to the right. Your bread and butter plate is to the left. So as you face all the different implements, and in many meals with many courses, the settings will change, hence the confusion. Very simple mnemonic device. We eat from the outside in. The flatware has been placed for your experience and your enjoyment, as well as for the server's ability to service you. So to give you an example, it's very likely that the first course that's going to be served to you is bread. And on the farthest part to your left is the bread and butter knife. In a later setting, in a few moments, when we show you the American style setting, you'll see that the bread and butter knife is still on the outside, albeit switched to the right. It will be furthermost to the end. So so we eat from the outside in. Further nuances as we go throughout the etiquette seminar, please remember that as the bread is passed around and the bread is on your plate, the next item to be passed around will be butter. And again, everything is passed to your right, because your right is your hand of skill and dexterity. Bread is usually placed on the plate, and you have a choice now when the butter arrives to either butter your bread or to just put a dollop of butter on the plate and pass the butter to the next person. You can take etiquette too far, and obviously we don't want that to occur. Bread, after it's on your plate and buttered, is torn. Bread is not cut with a knife and fork. That's taking etiquette far too far. So what basically happens is we're passing items to the right. The bread and butter plate is to your left. Your knives are to your right. Your forks are to your left. Now comes salt and pepper. Someone next to you or across the table from you may say, do you mind passing the salt? Salt and pepper are always passed as a set, and they're always passed together to the right. You should realize that while we're so accustomed today, another quick historic reference, that we're so accustomed today with so much sodium being in our food, we don't think of any possibility of a sodium deficiency in any way or form. But salt is a life-giving item. Salt was a preservative for food. Salt was so valuable. At one time, Roman soldiers were paid in salt. Small leather pouches of salt was how they were paid. And from that word salt, hence comes the word salary. So as I sit with my boss for lunch and we pass the salt and pepper, as I'm passing the salt, I'm probably thinking about my salary, hoping that he'll pass me some as well. You may have heard the superstition about throwing salt over your shoulder. That throwing salt over your shoulder was that since salt was so valuable, if you spilled salt, there must have been a demon behind you that caused that. So you would take more salt and blind him by throwing it there. Wasn't really the case, just cost you more salt. And what's even stranger, at large medieval meals, as they set the large banquet table with the lords and the kings and those of even lesser nobility, what they would actually do is, the salt was so valuable, it only went halfway down the table. The lesser lords were not able to avail themselves of that salt. And because the table was set only halfway with the salt and spices, we have the expression known as seated above and below the salt. Traditionally, if you're attending a large family event and it's a wedding of some kind, the closer you are to the bridal party, the more above the salt you are. And the further back you are, near the band and the busboy, the more likely you were just lucky enough to get an invitation at all. So now we've discussed the seating and your status based on being above or below the salt, we have to now review the place settings again. And remember, we've mentioned that you're moving from the outside in. This is what's known as a European cover. And as a European cover, it differs from the American cover in a number of different senses. And one of the ways it varies is it's assumed in a European dining environment that you would have soup in the beginning of the meal and that you would have coffee later on. But as things are getting a little chilly here in Philadelphia, it would not be unusual for us to find the coffee spoon on the outside. By the coffee spoon being on the outside, waiter comes over, takes your order, how you doing, fine, coffee. And that's the reason that would be placed there. At the same time, we have two different schools of thought when we get to the French cover and the American cover. In the American cover, which you're actually seeing a version of here, and we'll really truly make it an American formal cover, simply by taking the B&B knife and placing it over here. Now we have two things to look at. You have to say to yourself, is the spoon here because coffee is being served first? Or is the spoon here because we have the smaller fork on the outside and we want the smaller spoon on this side to create symmetry? The smaller fork obviously would be for salad because salad would precede the entree. So again, we're dining from the outside in. The smaller fork is for salad. The larger fork is for the entree. The larger knife is for the entree. The smaller knife, again, is for bread and butter. And then we have soup spoon and teaspoon. Now, going to the French cover. The French cover is different than the American cover. It's much more abbreviated. It actually appears to look something like this. And the only difference is the B&B knife is up on the B&B plate. The thought is, in American-style service, we don't know what you're going to be eating. We don't know what's on the menu that you're going to like, so we put all the flatware on the table for everything. In the French style of service, it's a much more abbreviated setting. The rationale is, if you order a salad using a mise or mise en place, we will present you with a chilled fork for the salad. So why put a salad fork and a soup spoon on the table if you're only having one? On the other hand, should you decide on the soup, a warm spoon would be brought out, and that would be brought to you over here. So basically, the concept with the Americans are, we don't know what you're having, put it all out there. And with the French, when you decide what you want, then we'll bring it out. What further confuses it a little bit more, and you need to be very cautious about this in the dining experience, is the fork and spoon above the plate. Whenever you see the fork and spoon above the plate, that's for dessert. Why both? The reason is, we don't know if you need a spoon for a sorbet, or a mousse, or a pudding, or a glacé, or perhaps a fabulous flambé we may be doing later on, or we don't know if it's a cake item. So that's why we have those two choices. The danger is that when the salad arrives, if you're not aware of the location of these items and their use for dessert, that as soon as the salad arrives, you go reaching for that fork to eat your salad with, when in fact that's really a dessert fork. So now you've demonstrated to the rest of the people at the table your lack of awareness of dining etiquette. Had you waited just a few moments, the server would have returned with, you guessed it, that chilled fork on that mise or mise en place. So it's very important that you understand that this setting is designed to create more service. More is less. The more that's on the table in the American fashion, the less service you're going to get. The less that's on the table, the more you're going to get. Interesting item. During World War II, many of our spies were captured in Germany because Americans eat strange. Americans basically take the fork and knife, spear the food, cut the food, replace the knife down the table, spear the food and eat it. Replace the knife and fork, do the same thing and go like this. When the European style of dining, cut the food, hold the food, it's in your fork, you can make it to your mouth, and don't do it like this. So when you watch the Americans move the flatware around, they were easily picked up. And it's just a simple nuance that different countries may have different fashions in the way they actually do that dining. Another thing that you need to be conscious of, and it can happen at lunch today as well as at dinner, is should the server come over and ask would anybody like a beverage. Now at this point, and times change, the pendulum is always swinging concerning alcoholic beverages, but we did mention to you previously that there was a host. And if the host is truly up on the values of etiquette, and they're going around looking at tables, I'm not really sure what I want to drink, and the host says, you know, I was really thinking about vodka rocks. And I go, absolutely, yes. And then that's something I would suddenly change for. On the other hand, if I'm not getting signals, then I might retreat to a lesser level of alcohol in the form of a glass of white wine and or possibly a beer. But I look forward to the host making that nuance. Another thing to remember is during the beverage consumption during the meal, not to over-imbibe. Because by over-imbibing, you just might say something you didn't mean to say. Matter of fact, in business, we try to tell you to drink a little less and that the others over-imbibe so you can find out a little bit more. But it's something you should be aware about, and you have to remember that alcoholic beverages is always touchy-feely, even in these times. One of the other things that's going to occur is the menus. And the menus are going to come out. By the way, keep in mind, since your right hand is your hand of skill and dexterity, your knife and your glassware is there. My significant other, if you recall, is to your right. We may be discussing something, we may be talking about something. So as not to interrupt me, or so as not to make me spill my glass of wine or water, the server will take my orders from my left, will present the guest check from my left, and will almost always present the menu from the left. Believe it or not, at one time we had two sets of menus. There were male menus and female menus, and the female menus did not have the pricing on them. You know how that worked out, so we no longer do that. But when you look at the menu, and again, you are in a social gathering, and the server comes over to take your order, please do not do the following. I'd like the salad, I like the dressing on the side, and you don't mind, can you make sure that the croutons aren't really overdone? You're now causing undue attention to yourself. The basic idea is just go along with the menu. Don't call undue attention to yourself. We have a joke in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, where the server comes over to the table, leans over and goes, "Is anything okay?" The whole idea is not to cause undue attention to yourself, because by doing that, you're proving yourself to be a very needy diner and trying to tell everybody that you know so much about food when you may have already committed a couple of faux pas in the way you handled the flatware. So it's very important that you understand in the dining environment what's going on and not to cause that attention to yourself. Now that we've discussed the menu and not causing too much attention to be drawn to yourself, you might find yourself in a situation where the person with you is a little bit less than knowledgeable of the cuisine and or the language actually on the menu. And as a gentleman or as a host, you want to exercise some chivalry and say, "I'm very familiar with this menu, would you like me to order for you?" And usually your significant other would more than likely go along with that. There are many times as a host, you might actually say, "I dine here all the time, and please, I don't want you to get distracted by the menu. Let me order for everybody." And by doing so, what that really does, it stops people from having any confusion. They're not sure who's possibly picking up the check or the tab. And at the same time, it doesn't make them buffer the size or the value of their order. So as a good host, if you see there's the slightest hesitation, whether it be on a date or from a business associate, just say, "I'm familiar with this menu. Let me do the ordering." Or let me suggest the following. Or let me order for everyone. One of the areas we're also going to encounter is wine service. And again, as we mentioned before, wine is one of those little touchy areas. But you do have to remember the cardinal rule that he who orders the wine samples the wine. While I might be the host and I might have called this party together this evening, the other gentleman facing me might say, "Well, at least let me order a bottle of wine. I saw something on the menu. I think we would all enjoy it." Then obviously, I would not be sampling the wine. He would be sampling the wine. When we talk about wine, and we talk about wine in general, okay, we have to remember that wine is very, very traditional. And as the wine sampling occurs, a lot of these traditional nuances are going to occur. And you as a diner, or you as an inexperienced diner and or observer, must be very cautious. While he may be more experienced, and the server is serving him, and for today's purposes, we'll just use this particular glass, the server will pour him a small sample, about 25%, and withdraw, and wait for his approval. Now, being the educated diner he is that has ordered the wine, there's no difficulty. But the less than educated person at the table might say, "That's it? That's all you're giving him?" And that's obviously wrong. You've basically blown it. So just sit back and watch and see what occurs. That is actually a sample. Historically, we had many nobles and many castles and said, "Come on, let's stop the feud. Come over to my castle. We'll have some wine. We'll bury the hatchet," not realizing I was planning to bury the hatchet in your back. And we would bring the wine out, and of course the wine was poisoned. So some people believe that the nuance of having the host sample the wine is to prove to the other parties that it's not poisoned. And that's really not the case. The real rationale behind it is he ordered the wine, he's going to sample the wine before the server goes any further. He who samples the wine first drinks last. The server would then go to the next party to his right, more than likely his significant other, and he would pour that individual a larger portion, probably about 2/3, and withdraw, continue around the table, and come back to the first person who sampled the wine and bring his glass to the proper level. And by doing so, they've all waited now, which is another thing to remember, since his glass is not as full as yours, to wait until they come around. And this is the perfect time to raise your glass in the form of a toast. So when we deal with wine, we're talking about the sampling and the process. Another thing to remember that we should have mentioned a little earlier, when that sample of wine is poured, and it's a small amount, don't be surprised if the host or the gentleman has ordered the wine raises the glass up, he's sighting the wine. He's going to swirl the wine to try to get some of the bouquet, sniff, and then take a small sip. For legal purposes, you understand this is a non-alcoholic beverage. This is brought to you by the legal side of Community College of Philadelphia. And as such, he would then nod his approval, and they would continue. So what basically happens, he would see the wine, sight the wine, swirl the wine, sniff the wine, sip the wine, swallow the wine, and then nod his approval, and everybody else would go around. When it finally came back to him, he would then be prepared for his toast. You'll also have to remember a couple other small things as we wrap up. One of the things that's going to occur is dessert is going to arrive. Coffee may arrive ahead of time. Sometimes coffee comes before dessert. There may be a presentation in the form of a flambe. The coffee cup, the handle, will always be at 5 o'clock because we are absolutely a right-handed world. And since we are dining with a European dining environment, it's very conceivable that when the service plate is removed and the dining utensils are removed, what the server may actually do is say, well, you know, I know what the dessert is, I know the beverage he's going to have, and he's going to take these two items and simply go like this. So we now know that the fork is going to be for the dessert and the spoon is for what? Coffee. And of course, you would exercise more dexterity with coffee than you would exercise with the cake. So the spoon is to your right and the fork is to your left. So what basically happens is you're creating a situation where you've got a more enjoyable dining experience. Now the check arrives. Now that the check has arrived, we get into the situation of tipping. And again, we have to compare the European environment to that of the American environment. Do not be surprised in the European environment if the gratuity is already on the guest check. So if you're surprised that there's no tipping occurring, don't go shouting at them, oh, what about the tip? What about the tip? No, it's already on the guest check. It's already taken care of. However, in an American environment, as we typically find it here in the city of brotherly love, tipping is an add-on. It is a percentile. If the service was at the barest minimum tolerable level, we would assume a 10% gratuity would be in order. Reasonable service would be 15% is the normal tipping environment for a gratuity. And then most importantly, if the service was really great, 20, 25%. That usually means the service was fantastic, the people at the table might be in the hospitality industry, or just, again, you're not really good at math. So now that the gratuity has been handled and you're getting ready to leave, you want to say to your host, next time, please let me pick the restaurant, let me take care of things. And you want to do these goodbyes and departure as soon as you can and keep it brief. You've had a wonderful dining experience. We'd like you to understand that we, as the faculty in the Culinary Arts and Hospitality Management program, want you to enjoy your dining experience. Go out often. Go out with friends. Have a good dinner. Drink wine. Enjoy the evening. And if you need any further information, just contact us at Community College of Philadelphia, Culinary Arts, Hospitality Management. But that's all, folks.